We were waiting a little bit. We do know that Councillor Sabran is not going to be here today, but we haven't received notice from Councillor McDonald. So, and we haven't been able to reach her. So we'll just get started. The agenda. Do we have a mover and a seconder on the agenda? Okay, we have Councillor Williams and Mayor Towndale. Mover and seconder, all in favor of adopting the agenda? That's carried. The approval of the minutes of the March 28th, 2024 meeting. A mover and a seconder on that. Councillor McDonald and Councillor Williams. Do we have, is everyone in favor of the approving the minutes of the March 28th, 2024 meeting? Seeing everyone's in favor, that's carried. Any conflicts of interest or pecuniary interest or general nature thereof? Seeing none. No presentations, no new business. Am I correct, Madam CAO? And we'll move into reports. 6.1, the Provincial Offences Report. Chief Lister. Yeah, well, we're going to twist it up a little bit today and see if, see how he does. He said he wasn't busy enough. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Ms. Russell.
We could switch spots if you want. I'm okay with it. I don't have a whole big amount to report on, but our last meeting was just felt like yesterday. But some of the key items that I just wanted to bring to your attention. So I normally like to provide kind of like a snapshot in time of the ticket quantities we've been receiving, because as we know, in 2006 we peaked with 30,000 tickets a year. We have a tough time making 10,000 tickets a year right now, but if we look at a quarterly snapshot from 2019 to 2024, just for the first quarter of each year, I wanted to demonstrate that our ticket quantities are climbing again, mostly due to the OPP issuing a significant amount of tickets compared to prior years. In this quarter in 2024, the OPP has issued 2,194 tickets. And if we look at 2019, it was actually 1,635 tickets. So they are quite active in issuing tickets, which is a good sign. The ministries are also increasing, the MTO specifically increasing their tickets as well. Cornwall PD is not quite at the levels that we were hoping to see in this quarter. I did receive yesterday, the Ministry of Attorney General has provided me with the statistics for April, which isn't included in this report, and I was very, very surprised to see that we received 1,430 tickets in 1 month. The last time we saw that quantity of tickets in 1 month was in April of 2018. So that's quite significant, and I'm quite impressed, and I'm hoping that continues going forward. And again, it was mainly due to the activities of the OPP. So with regards to the tickets, the ticket volumes, it does also reflect on the next stage is the revenues and expenses. We are starting to see a little bit of stability in the gap between the revenues and expenses based on 2023 to 2024, the first quarter. We've had a little bit of instability when COVID hit, and you can see by the graph that it was a little bit all over the place. Despite the ongoing revenue that is being generated, it's still not at the point of revenue that it was in the 2000s, early 2000s, and mostly 2006. I don't know that we'll ever see that again, but the decline correlates with a province-wide reduction. This is not just SDG related, this is just across the province. Everybody's experiencing the same thing. Expenses do increase over time with, wages being, increased by CPI. Other types of expenses always seem to increase. Fine revenues have never increased, like a set fine for speeding, for insurance, for any of those types of fines, they don't increase with CPI. So most of them are the same fine amount as they were in the early 2000s. So those revenues aren't growing with our expenses. Not to mention the fact that we're also not receiving the same amount of tickets that we did in the past. So there are various factors that play into the revenue not growing to the same state that the expenses are. And my last thing is the transfer of the Part 3. Just a quick update. At the last council meeting, at SCG County's council meeting, it was discussed for direction on how to proceed with the Part 3s. And it was decided at county councils that it was going to be deferred until it was potentially legislated by the province. This approach does allow for the county to be fully prepared when the transition does happen. However, should anything change, I'll communicate that with council at the time that we receive new information. So if council wishes to pursue a different direction, then we could do that going forward. I did want to provide a little bit of an update with regards to, there was a prosecutors conference last week, and our prosecutor did attend. There are some courts that have taken on the Part 3s. Belleville, L'Oreal, Picton, Epony, there are a couple. However, they have already had a per diem prosecutor doing Part 3s already. So they took the transfer on with already having that prosecutor in place, although they were per diem. Most recently, the City of Ottawa has declined the transfer of Part 3s. I don't really know the full reason why. However, I do believe the workload with the transfer is one of the reasons why. We have Halton Region, Windsor, London, Sudbury, Barrie, and Muskoka who have also not accepted the transfer. And as I get more information on those that accept and those that don't, I think it might be valuable information to share that it is a mixed bag of people accepting and not accepting. I do know on a few of occasions through our meetings and our communications, some that have accepted the transfer potentially would have not had they had the full amount of information at the time that they accepted. So giving us some time to fully evaluate what the future of the court system is, the judicial resources, the quantity of tickets and how they're going to come in, we can properly plan for that transition to be successful. Regardless of what council decides, whether we take on the Part 3s or not take on the Part 3s, I do think that we would be successful either way, just with proper planning and increased costs, obviously, to have additional staffing and things like that. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Ms. Russell. I look at Warden McDonald, and did you want to make a comment about how County Council, how they felt? I know it was expressed by Ms. Russell, how we felt about that, but I ask if you would too.
Well, about it, that it just didn't fit in with what we were doing, and knowing that most weren't taking it on, why would we jump in and with more expenses and costs? So I think everybody on County Council agreed with the recommendation from Rebecca and Maureen. So I think it's the smart thing to do, sit back and wait till it's legislated for us to have to do it. So.
Thank you. Questions, comments for Ms. Russell? Yes, ma'am.
May I add? So I did outline a few other items that I thought might be valuable to share. So if we do take over Part 3s, it would result in savings from the ministry, because we do pay for prosecution services through the ministry, but the offset is we have to hire additional staff full-time. There's 2 prosecutors right now that work in tandem, so we would need a full staff member, so the cost would be higher that way. It would also increase costs to the supervision of our municipal prosecutors, because they're not lawyers, our prosecutor is not a lawyer. Therefore, we have an agreement with a local law firm who does supervision for our municipal prosecutor. Taking on the Part 3s, there'd be a larger quantity of supervision that would be required, and we would probably most likely incur costs of prosecuting the more serious charges, which are now done by the Crown's office. And another note is that I can't predict the future of what the Ministry of Attorney General is going to put down put on municipal courts, provincial courts down the road. Once we accept this agreement, there is no going back. You accept, things can change. You can't go backwards in time. So I just want to make sure that we know the full picture before we take on a responsibility. But either way, we will always be prepared for the transition, whether it's legislated or not.
Thank you. So anything else to this from any member of council, of the committee? Okay, thank you, Ms. Russell. Now the one we've been waiting for, Chief Lister. I'm sorry. Chief Lister will speak to the paramedic services update. Deliver the paramedic services update. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So since the last time we've talked, MPDS, the new priority system, it has been implemented. It went live April the 10th. It went without a hitch by 3 in the morning. All the dispatch center consoles have been switched over. We were into the new system. Really tremendous job. It's understated on how much work that was. We have a very small sample size, and I'll just give you a quick overview of what that's indicating. In effect, the conclusion is it's working. It's doing what it's supposed to do, in that the sicker patients are getting the higher priorities, and we are seeing some benefits from that. So from that very small sample size, our emergency code 4 in the old language, which is a purple in the new language, have dropped by 18%. That doesn't mean that the call volume's dropped, it's just the prioritization of the patient isn't as serious. So we're running down lights and sirens lots less. Well, not lots less, 18% less time on that very small sample size. And it's indicating when the paramedics arrive that it is accurate. So we're not getting a lot of lower priority calls that are coming back as more serious than the dispatchers had prioritized from the dispatch area. So that's working really well. They're trying to get to accreditation. Accreditation will allow the dispatch center to work more independently from the oversight, which will allow services to do special operations. So if they can get to accreditation, we can start dealing with things like non-ambulance transfers through the paramedic system. They'll still get triage, but we have to get there. So that's our goal, is in the next year or so. It takes a while to get accreditation, about a year they estimate. They need about a 70% compliance rate. Right now they're running around 40%, which is where they predicted it to be. This is dispatchers, and just to give you an idea, like the accuracy that they need to work at, they have scripts, and if they don't use the script, so they change a word from like heart attack to cardiac arrest, they're non-compliant, even though the message is the same. So that's how strict they are on the compliance. So the ACOs, the dispatchers, are doing a really good job. Their compliance is at 40. Which is very good for first month on the job. And they anticipate that will improve greatly. They are slightly over prioritizing the red calls, which is the time sensitive, not time critical. They're coming in with more of them than they should. And some of that is just their historic, well, that was never that level. It was always more urgent than it is, and they're pushing the numbers up. They're catching that in the quality of improvement process, and that will temper down, we anticipate, into the future. Some of the good stuff for the paramedic group, end of shift is down by 75 hours, which is meaning they're ending their shifts because we can move that urgent call to the next crew instead of having somebody 2 minutes to the end of the shift going out on an emergency call. We can temper that out. And their legislative breaks, which we were terrible at getting them, have also been more adherent to. So they're getting a lunch basically. Is they're getting 30 minutes to actually eat and pee and stuff like that. So it's working well. We are getting a few complaints. We've personally, as a service, not received one external complaint on the system. We have a mechanism built in that they can complain or make comments, and we haven't received anything on that. We have received feedback from the dispatch center that the hospitals are concerned because what used to go out really quickly isn't happening anymore, and some of that is them not using the system the way they're supposed to use. So if they have a really urgent call, they're supposed to use this thing called Critical, which sorts out like how do we move people between hospitals so that they get the care they need, and they're just calling dispatch saying we want this car to move, or it's we're full, we want you to move this. It has nothing to do with the patient care issues. Some of the spill off of what we're working on into the future is a repatriation. So we do a lot of tertiary care or primary care in our area, and we go to a tertiary care, which is in Ottawa. In the new system, they realized that if we arrive and the patient so they see the specialist and the specialist deems the patient as not needing any services in Ottawa, to get them back was a problem because they go into queue as an orange or a red or whatever, and instead of just turning the ambulance around with the patient in it and bringing them back, they had to go into queue. So we're working on that. And the minister is so we're second we're second out of the gate. So the Toronto area did it, Toronto, Niagara, and all that area has MPDS. And the difference between that area and this area is that area has all its tertiary care in the areas that they service. So like Niagara has a trauma hospital, Toronto has a trauma hospital. So there are not a lot of ambulances moving across geographic boundaries in those areas. It's new. They're discovering that in this area that there is a lot of cross-border shopping or transfers. And so it's new to the area, and they're making some changes to allow that to happen. That's just an example of the continuous improvement that's built into the system, which was never there before, and that's a really good thing that's going on. So overall, it's working. The transition was smooth, and paramedics picked it up really quickly, and they're running with it. So the community is being serviced better now than it was pre-April 10th, so good thing.
Thank you, Chief. Questions, comments? Mr. CAO.
If I can ask the Chief, just we can't discuss a bit as a trend because it's early, but there's some indication on percentage of diversion of calls you referred to me that. Yeah, so one of the things that has changed from the old system to the new system is, as you're aware, we used to turn the radios off when we were in Ottawa so that we could get back into our areas. The ministry had indicated that when the new system, the MPDS system, comes in, they will not tolerate that but they categorize it as only on the purples or the reds. So only the time-sensitive calls, it's universal, wherever the ambulance is the call that gets it. So we've seen now remember the sample size is small. In the same period before MPDS, we did 29 calls in Ottawa, and in post MPDS, we did 22 calls outside of our area. So there is a drop. They're monitoring that more. There's lots of discussion on that type of stuff, and the repatriation will help us because the ambulance is full coming back. So it gets a patient back into the geography that they want to be in, and they can't assign the call because they're occupied. So continuous work on that. Renfrew went live today. They went seamless. So that's the next one we need to go live to have the whole area covered by the same program is Kingston, and they're not due till next year. So now they move to Georgian and start working their way back across the other dispatch centers. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
So I'll just comment on public service radio networks. So just to keep it as simplistic and layperson, like where I live in this part of the equation. So as you were told, they're changing the radio systems. That's the hardware, the radios, the things they carry on their hips, and the things mounted on their dashboards. They're all getting turned out, plus the antennas on buildings and all the wiring in between. So they're moving from like a copper wire to a fiber optic wire. We're going live with that on July the 22nd. We have training underway now, and that's going well. It's quite a simple process. It's a change in process, like channels and talk groups and all that type of stuff, but that's where paramedics live, and it's easy for them to learn. Where it gets complicated at this level is the portable radio, the thing they carry on their hips. We tend to lose or they get stolen. And when the ministry is given notice that they will no longer cover the cost of that. It used to be the ministry would cover all radio costs because they own the radios. Now they're saying, we'll get you up and running, and after that, it's your expense. The one radio costs $10,000 on the portable. We have 44 radios. Now, we're not going to lose 44 radios or breakers damaged, and they're specific to the vehicle. So in the old system, it used to be, here's a bushel of portable radios, and anybody could use them. So often what would happen is you have ambulances in a hospital or whatever, they put the radio down, they pick up the wrong radio, they pick up two radios or whatever. It's pretty innocent processing, but you'd end up short a radio, and you'd call the ministry and they'd send you another radio. And now if that happens, they're going to make you fill out a police report and charge you $10,000 for the new radio. So that's in effect a download across the province. We're trying to get a dollar amount on it for it, and we don't have any data on it because we just used to transfer radios quite freely, and there was no real issue to it. So there's good and bad on that story. We're going to get an enhanced radio system. So on July the 22nd, when we're implemented, they're going to hold back all the stuff we had talked about, like the NG 911, which is text to 911 or video to 911 and all that type of stuff, until they have a good picture of what that looks like in the dispatch centers. They're actually trying to protect the dispatchers from video to 911 because they don't want the dispatchers seeing some of the stuff that is on the road. They try and limit the scope so that there's not as much trauma in the workplace. So they haven't made decisions on what will be moving on it, but that's kind of the big cost difference on that. And if there's no questions, I'll just talk to you about supply chain, which specifically it's the ambulances. We're really struggling to get ambulances through the supply chain. Part of the problem is there's only one vendor. There used to be, in effect, two vendors, and they merged. So we now have one vendor. So you hear words like Crestline is one vendor and Demers was the other vendor. They came, so now it's called Crestline Demers, and they're servicing all of Ontario. Now we can only buy an ambulance and have it certified and it needs to be certified. So I can't just go to Joe Blow ambulance builder and say I want an ambulance and just put it on the road. To be able to get a number that dispatch will use, it has to be certified, and we have to demonstrate to the ministry the certification, which is a long, arduous process. So collectively, the paramedic services are going to the minister to say we need changes in the equipment standards so that we can have more competition. So there's very specific criteria, like you must be an Ontario engineer to stamp anything on an Ontario ambulance, which basically makes any U.S. competition not interested in the process. And I'm not particularly worried about the difference between an Ontario engineer or Albertan engineer or Arizona engineer. It's just an example of how restrictive the policy is. So there is some work on moving that forward. That might take some time, so we're gonna have to rethink the way we are doing the ambulances. So we have 3 in queue for removing the box and putting a new chassis under. We might have to slow down that program, because not only do we have to add ambulances to the road, we need more spares. We're running short on spares. So we're going to try and buy on the front end and save on the back end, and that means that a box on, box off won't happen. That's our strategy. If we could buy 5 new ones, we would do it, which is quite expensive. Ambulance has gone up about $80,000 in the last 3 years, way above the cost of living. But we're at that level that we're quite concerned about the number of ambulances we have to work with. So we have to do something about it, and that's the approach we're going to initially take.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Now, this must be a problem across Ontario, I'm assuming.
The ambulance problem?
Yes, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And is the ministry, like, you'd think that they'd be kind of hopping about this a little bit. They really dragging their feet?
So what the ministry is involved is basically the service provider, us, can pick any ambulance we want as long as it meets the standards. So they kind of say, we'll write the standards and you go find the vendors.
Yeah.
And it turns out that you wrote the standards so tightly that we can't find other vendors. They're not interested in putting anything on the Ontario market. So now the pressure is on. Don't just write it so it's more open. Write it the standard so that there's more competition that can apply to the thing. But yeah, and this is why, like, ideally I would just buy new and get rid of the old, and or we would buy new and get rid of the old, but we don't have that luxury. We're fighting amongst ourselves to get the ambulances we need.
How quickly do you think they're going to respond to that?
I think it's
changing
going to
this?
be fairly
Okay,
quickly.
good.
They're pretty responsive to the problem and the price.
Councillor McDonald.
Just a quick question, Don. Are they having issues, say, in Quebec, getting ambulances?
So Quebec is run a little differently than Ontario. So Quebec is run basically as a provincial service. So Montreal, basically the province buys all the ambulances they need for the year and they're done. I don't know what their...
Do they have the same restrictions that we have?
No, they're quite different.
They're quite open?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've never compared the Quebec one. I just know they don't qualify in Ontario. Now they use Demers, which is the same company that Ontario uses. So the ones that can do Ontario, they don't just do Ontario. We're bidding against, Saudi Arabia buys ambulances from Demers, as an example. So it's tight. It used to be it was the parts we couldn't get. Now it's still we can't get those things. So there's the lobbying is also with like the manufacturers, like Ford. Can you earmark some chassis just for emergency services, and 99% of them are Fords. Why can't Chevy, for example, be in that market as well? And so that's the negotiation that's going on out there. There's nothing in the standard that says it must be a Ford or it must be a Chevy, but Chev isn't interested in producing to the standard that they need.
Chief, I'm just wondering, so it's the Ministry of Health is managing the standards required. There's not another ministerial body or group that advises. It's just a question that's gnawing at my head a little bit.
So
It's just the Ministry of Health that determines.
So it's a structure within the ministry. So there's the Ministry of Health, and then there's probably 15 branches of the ministry. And paramedics sits out on one of the branches. It's the Emergency Health Services branch. And in that branch is where the standards are written. So the minister is the one that would have the authority to change the regulation that says this is what is required in the ambulance. So they're trying to move that quickly. So there's lots of lobbying. Their ears are open to it. And you might hear of some of that stuff through like AMO or Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus or something like that, because they're lobbying all over the place to get that done.
Thank you. Is there anything further, Chief?
I think that's it.
Any further questions, comments for the Chief? Seeing none, thank you. And Ms. Morgan, the Human Services update.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to be presenting the Human Services update today. I would like to say there hasn't been much to update since our last meeting, but it's never a dull moment in our world. So I will continue to provide the same information that we do on a regular basis, starting with our Housing Services Department. So our centralized wait list, again, we're remaining fairly steady with our centralized wait list, and at some point in this year are slated to do a more extensive review of that wait list. Certainly that will come in part following our long-term development plan, which I'll talk about shortly. Before I talk about Ontario Renovates, I think it's important for me to speak to the negotiations or debates right now that are going on between the provincial and federal government. Certainly it's making things extremely difficult for service managers to plan for the upcoming year, not knowing exactly what kind of funding that we are getting from those levels of government. And so some of our programming, I will say, has been stalled or suspended until we know definitively the allocations that we may be getting. Ontario Renovates is one of those programs, and so we are still slated to launch spring of 2024 as soon as we are able to get a definitive allocation from the ministry on what that funding looks like, so we know how much money we're able to put towards that program. In terms of our long-term development plan, that is almost at its completion, and we will be presenting that to city and county councils in June. And it's actually quite exciting to see what the site plan designs look like on the various parcels of land that we have in our land bank. So we're excited to bring that to both councils to show what the future of housing can look like over the next 10 years or so. In terms of our by name list, our statistics for April of 2024, we had 72 individuals who have been who are still actively homeless. 170 individuals have been housed since the inception of this by name list. Largely that has been due to some of the efforts over the last year. We have provided 11 crisis bed stays in the last month, just as an example on how we're helping people on the by name list. I will say we just recently received a letter from that our by names list is a qualified by names list, and that we are meeting all of the standards with respect to that. And so that means that we are moving in the right direction in trying to become a built for zero community. And so we're moving rapidly towards that. In terms of our domiciliary program, again, just to provide you an update with how many domiciliaries we contract with and the number of beds that we continue to average over the monthly average over the last over the last month. In terms of our end of mortgages, there has been no change since our March report. With respect to our housing services division, and so that's our actual housing stock, we have provided you with some information with respect to tenant placements as of May 2024. And with respect to our winter housing solution, an update on that, we are negotiating with the owners of that property to extend that lease possibly to June of 2025, and that will bridge the gap while we continue with our Massey Commons construction and until we're ready to occupy that facility. We've provided you some statistical information on our capital maintenance and ongoing repairs of our existing stock. I also want to provide you with an update with respect to asset management planning and building condition assessments. So we have completed building condition assessments for all of our internal housing stock, as well as those managed by our external community providers. This is an initiative that has been undertaken by the municipality to meet mandated requirements. And so part of that is we've extended that to our external housing providers so they have the same information and we'll be able to utilize that information to build 10-year asset management plans for their own facilities going forward. So we're in the next stages of that with respect to what does that look like in terms of now financial commitment to keeping those assets up to par over the next 10 years. Again, with respect to development updates, we have 3 active developments that are underway right now, and they are all proceeding through the next stages of each of those developments. With respect to our expansion at the Glen Morris in Morrisburg, that is moving to the final stages of the tender process. With respect to Massey Commons, we are at the next steps of zoning planning, site plan approval, and our costing to go to issue a tender for that, construction tender for that development. And certainly with our Pitt Street development, we are moving forward with the expropriation process of a parcel of land so that we're able to create an expanded parcel of land for future development as well as the current development that we'd like to undertake at that site. That is housing, the housing update. If there are any questions?
Yes, Madam CAO.
Thank you. I just have a question with respect to Ontario Renovates. I know it's a relatively small program given the bigger items that we're dealing with in housing, but for Ontario Renovates, that program seems to, or at least I think last year, a significant number of applications for a limited amount of funding. And it appeared from a couple of calls that I got in SDG that if you weren't like first out of the gate in there the day that it opened and one of the first number of applications, then you didn't get in the queue. And my question is how to manage that demand, right? Because if there's some people that might not have access, might not be, when you think about housing and challenges with housing, if it's someone senior or if it's someone that's in a house that, so my question is there any thought process to how to navigate through that application process, or do you allow carryovers from a previous year to be on a wait list before you take in more new applications the following year? So it seems like there's a short window, and if you're not in that window, then you're out of luck.
That is correct. That has been our past practice because we have had to undertake a method that seems the most transparent and fair with respect to selecting individuals. So certainly that has been a first come, first served basis. We try to publicize as much as possible prior to the launch, whether it be through posters, social media, newspapers, various things like that, so that everybody is aware. We have in the past also people that have been on our wait list last year that may have been at that sort of cusp of qualifying, but they are, we've maximized the number of individuals that we can serve in a year. Let them know that, typically start looking on our website around April or looking for information. It is definitely challenging because we, sometimes we will get, everything's time-stamped in terms of whether it's received in person or whether it's received online. And so we do time-stamp everything. Certainly I can go back to the team and see if there's another way we could look at accepting applications or selecting applications, whether it's all the applications are received within a certain time period and then it's a lottery draw of applications. There are other methods. I'm not sure how far down the process the team is right now. It hasn't launched yet, so certainly we're not that beyond that capacity to have a look at it. But certainly I can speak to the team to see if there are other recommendations they may have as well.
If I may, just a follow-up question. Depending on the funding, how much funding we get, you know, could one of the considerations be that there's maybe one intake for half of it or part of the funding, and then, you know, a month or two later, like a 2 months later, like another intake, right? So if something's happened in somebody's window of life at that particular time, if they couldn't apply, then maybe it's just a thought, right? Because I know that it's heavily oversubscribed, but also those people that need it the most, there's other things that are going on in their lives at the time that might affect their ability to respond quickly. So maybe if there's, and I'm just proposing an idea.
Yeah, no, thank you for that suggestion. And, you know, it's not something we can't consider. I think we would have to consider how late in the year we could accept perhaps a second intake if we were to split the funds up, because we do have to meet ministry timelines. And so documentations and milestones need to be met based on ministry expectations and timelines. So again, not out of the realm of possibilities. I think it's just a matter of managing that through our own resources and whether or not we can manage 2 separate launches. And if it's not for this year, maybe it's something we consider for next year, certainly.
Right, and the ministry needs to be reasonable as well, because if you're trying to line up contractors as we've seen.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that the program and homeowners face, is that trying to find a contractor who might be willing to do smaller projects or smaller in cost is very difficult, especially when construction season, most contractors plan in January for their upcoming year. So that is a bit challenging to try and get qualified contractors to come and do these smaller jobs for individuals.
Anything further, Madam CEO? No. Councillor McGillis.
Thank you very much. We're reading in the paper that you know, there's the units that are being vandalized or wrecked, if you will. What is the protocol? Is there any discipline and procedures, or because I noticed there the new building that they built is in pretty bad shape inside. What is the protocol that we have to get reimbursed the money that it's costing us to repair these buildings?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so I would like to go on record and say that the building is not as dire situation as it may have been led to believe in the newspaper. Certainly we have a maintenance team who's very proactive when any of our buildings, you know, there's any damage to any of our buildings, whether it's a tenant or just ongoing maintenance of a building. Certainly we have to, as a landlord, we have to follow the Residential Tenancies Act and that process with respect to notices leading up to eviction. In addition, we can also put what we would call an arrears on a client's file for damages caused to their unit. Certainly what that does is if somebody has an arrears, if they leave a unit or are evicted and they have arrears, those arrears need to be paid before they can go back onto the wait list. Because we are community housing, certainly we have to take, I would say, a lot more due diligence in proceeding down that path to eviction. Because once somebody is evicted from community housing, typically their options for housing after that are extremely limited. So while I say it's a lengthy process, it is a much needed process on our behalf for due diligence. If this were ever to go to the Landlord-Tenant Board for review, we need to make sure that we can demonstrate we've done everything to try and mitigate the situation before we get to eviction.
Melissa, I'm just wondering if you could, how, like, from just thinking of Madam CEO's questions, at what point do the applications or the notice of applications to be received go out to when the decision has to be made? And just about that timeline, and you were talking about hiring contractors, is it a month, is it 2 months, is it 6 months?
So typically, if I were to use an example, we were to launch May 1st. Certainly, we have an application period, so we receive our applications, and then they're reviewed by our staff to determine what some of the things we've done in recent years is that if you've previously qualified for the program, it's basically for first-time applicants. And once we have gone through all of our first-time applicants, then it's on a chronological basis for applicants thereafter. So there's a review process. Following that, then we have staff who will contact the homeowner to advise of their eligibility. And then the process would start from there in terms of the contractor and having the contractor come in and do the work. We typically require 2 quotes to go with our application so that we can ensure that individuals are trying to get the best bang for their buck, if they will, and the money that is available to them. And we have timing processes leading up to, typically we have to commit a certain percentage of those funds by December 31st every year to the ministry. Otherwise, the ministry then can relocate any uncommitted funds to other service managers. So and that whole process, there are other documents we have to do. So we try and do it early enough in the year so we're not scrambling. We have in the past, because we've received late allocations or additional allocations, we have in the past launched in October, and that is almost a near impossible time frame to meet that threshold of December 31st. Does it mean we couldn't launch again perhaps in August? Again, the team has a pretty robust plan for the year in terms of the resources and where we've allocated resources for the year. So I'm not saying we couldn't do it as a second round. Once we know our funding allocation, hopefully that's fairly soon so we can launch, and then we're not behind the 8 ball in terms of timelines. But I will definitely bring this back to the team to see if there's an option to split the money and do 2 launches, or at least look at a different criteria for launching in terms of, is it a lengthier period? We'd accept so many applications within that period, and then perhaps we look at some type of lottery, if you will, of the qualified applicants.
I guess one last question would be, based on, do you recall how much money you received last year for Ontario Renovates? It's through our Ontario Priority Housing Initiative that we use those funds. We don't use all of the funds for Ontario Renovates. I want to say last year's funds were somewhere in the neighborhood of $575,000, and that typically would cover Ontario Renovates and some of our other programs that we would cover through that. So I'd be guessing right now, but I would say probably only about $450,000 of that allocation went to Ontario Renovates. I will say in past years, we used to have $1 million that went to that program. Right, and so I remember when it was a bigger fund.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess the follow-up question would be, is there a portion that's allocated to SDG versus Cornwall? Like, is it sort of allocated between our jurisdictions, or is it based on application?
Right now, it's based on application on a first-come, first-served basis.
I do believe there's more.
Yes, there is. Next would be our Children's Services Division. Again, this seems to be the time of year when ministries like to provide either initial information with respect to funding or future information. I will say this week that we received information from Ministry of Education that there will be a new funding approach that will come into effect January 1st, 2025. And we don't know the particulars about that, and so we will continue to analyze as we receive additional information from the ministry with respect to the impacts of that on our 2025 budget. And certainly we will let this committee know as well what those impacts may be. Again, we've provided you with our licensed childcare capacity in Cornwall and SG&G, and this represents the childcare spaces in each region where we have an existing contract with a provider. While the current operating capacity is 2,090, the current vacancy rate as compared to the current occupancy capacity is approximately 11%, or 230 spaces. And then we've provided you with a summary of what that looks like with respect to the chart below. Again, one of the biggest things in children's services right now continues to be the critical shortage of staff. It's not necessarily that an individual does not qualify for CWILC funding. It's just that the child care center that they may want to send their children to has a wait list because they don't have qualified staff to be able to either expand or maintain the classrooms or the spaces that they have. So that critical staffing shortage continues to be paramount with respect to available childcare spaces. The childcare division is undertaking workforce updates, and so you will see from our latest survey at the bottom of page 5, this is survey results from March of 23, September 23, and March of 24. We are doing this twice a year, and so you can see here on our recruitment survey results what the summary of those results have shown with respect to where the available positions are or the staffing shortages are. Again, we continue to move through our Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement, and that the next implementation of that will be coming out shortly. On March 28th, the ministry announced updates to childcare workforce strategy that hopefully is going to, in conjunction with Canada-wide early learning system, that, you know, hopefully these things will increase those wanting to go into the childcare field. They include increasing funding to support things like emerging issues, to support licensing and addressing cost pressures. They're increasing funding and flexibility to startup grants. These will support operators with non-capital costs. There's a new early learning childcare infrastructure fund, and the details will be shared later on in 2024. And the ministry has also indicated that they're finalizing the new funding formula, which I had mentioned earlier. They have provided that announcement that it's effective January of 2025, with further details to come on how that may impact our 25 budgets going forward. Excuse me. That is children's services.
Questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you.
And last, in terms of our Ontario Works Division, caseloads from this year to last year, certainly you will see a significant reduction from this year to last year. That really, it does reflect the impact that we had seen with a significant increase of asylum claimants that had come into our community this time last year. It is holding steady, and you'll see later on I provide a report on asylum claimants. Our caseload breakdown, this does provide you with the trend of number of clients in school and individuals retaining employment across our three operating offices. In terms of employment service transformation, we continue that was launched in January of this year, if you remember. So we continue to move through assessing all of our clients, completing a common assessment, and moving them through the process where they are eligible to be referred to the employment agency. We are working with 2 employment agencies, JobZone and GIG, and so the referrals continue to move through to those organizations as soon as we're able to assess clients. Excuse me. With respect to asylum claimants, there continues to be roughly 470 claimants in Cornwall. At the Dev Center, they have about 274 beds currently not in use. IRCC has indicated that they will continue to work within the existing contract that they have with the Dev Center. They also continue to do transfers to Cornwall from other areas. Most specifically, there was a transfer into Cornwall on May 1st from Toronto of 43, that contained 43 individuals. And there was another one on May 3rd that contained 22 individuals. So the increase of 65 individuals. Because they're coming from Toronto, that they're probably, if they're already in receipt of social assistance, there wouldn't be a need to complete a new application. However, it still could mean, and we have yet to analyze this information, whether or not that means an increase of 65 individuals onto our Ontario Works caseload. In terms of Ontario Works, that's a bit of an update from there.
Questions? Yes, Claude.
On the asylum seekers, do we track people like, I assume when you say protected persons, that means they've got eligible to get work in Canada.
That's correct.
Do we track people where they go? When you're at DevCorp, you get cleared.
Right.
You're no longer eligible for assistance. You've got 45 days to find. Do many stay in Cornwall, or they move on to family somewhere else? Or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it has been, I would say, I don't have definitive numbers with me. I would say it fluctuates. Some individuals want to relocate to larger urban centers for the expansion of work possibilities or cultural significance. Many are staying and would like to stay. Once they come to this area, they see the benefits of, our eastern region. Certainly, they would like to stay here. It is challenging, as you know, because housing is already a crisis within our community, and so certainly it does put additional pressures on other resources available within our community. But many are finding work here and working through the IRCC and the Dev Center. In some cases, they are able to find housing because of their employment status, or they are sometimes individuals are banding together to rent larger units. So that many of them are staying, in a 2, 3, 4 bedroom unit, if you will. 3 or 4 of them are splitting the cost on that. So it's a little more financially viable for them to do something like that. So I don't have definitive, but I would say many are wanting to stay here in this area.
You talk about extra pressure in the system. I know the ER hospital was not overrun, but there was a challenge there of people coming in without WIP cards even and whatnot. And my colleague, Councillor Hollingsworth, tells me that he had 2 students who couldn't speak English in his class. So there was challenges there. That doesn't come back to you, does it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, not necessarily. The way IRCC and the Dev Center have managed their operations is that they tend to provide many of those services on site. They still have school classrooms on site. Now, with respect to high schools, that might be a little bit different because there may not be enough to complete a whole cohort of individuals at the high school level. Language is a barrier, whether it is within our staff to be able to manage the diverse languages that we are seeing. Again, it's problematic in the sense that we don't have all of those interpreters available in our area. And so, language is definitely one of the barriers that individuals are needing to work with in order to establish themselves within the community.
Is there anything further from Ms. Morgan? Mr. CAO.
Just on the last point. Just on the last point, I recognize one of our counselors does work in the school system and would be quite knowledgeable. But when we recently visited, the English Public Board had classrooms for younger age students at the Dev, and I assume that was part of their intention, was that entire language learning prior to bringing it into the school system. But I'm not sure how that would apply to older kids and to Francophone kids for the Francophone boards. But I don't know, Melissa, if you had more specific to that, but when we met with them, you could see that the small cohort that had education on site within the former gym accommodations, that it was mainly linguistic preparation, if you will.
And I think just, sorry, I have nothing further to add to what CAO Fleury has indicated there, other than perhaps, as the demographic changes within the Dev Center, if there are fewer families that are coming, whether or not those types of services will contract as necessary. I think those are things that certainly IRCC is working with the school board to determine what level of service may be needed as they start to change the demographic makeup of the individuals residing there. And on a last note, just items of general discussion, the QP 4452 bargaining has been very smooth and positive, and both the union and council have approved the ratification of a new collective agreement. And the 4452 represents the Housing Services Division, so all of our office staff and maintenance staff who maintain all of our buildings across the region. So very happy to report that. That is the end of my report.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Is there anything else from members of this committee? Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 7. It has a listing here on the agenda, the 2024 meetings, Thursday, July 11th, Thursday, September 26th, and Thursday, November 14th. I trust they all still work for most. Thank you. And the adjournment. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Councillor, I want to say Councillor McDonald, but Councillor Williams. Councillor McDonald. Is it councillor or is it? Yes, it's not deputy mayor. We're in county council. Thank you. Yeah. So all those in favor? I forgot where I was. Yes. Opposed? I think you're in favor. Okay, it's carried. Thank you very much, and I guess we'll see each other at the next meeting, Thursday, July 11th.